What happens when a successful CEO decides to work incognito at his own company? He uncovers the emotional journey of one employee, a single mom balancing work and life. And what he does next will leave you speechless. Imagine the power dynamics in any company. The CEO is at the top with a sweeping view of everything below. The higher up the ladder you climb, the more distant you become from the true heartbeat of your business. Now, picture a CEO, a leader of a vast empire, who chooses to walk away from the comfort of his corner office and work incognito as just another employee on the floor. This decision sets the stage for an extraordinary revelation, one that will not only open his eyes but shake the foundations of his beliefs about success, work, and empathy. But there's more to this story. In the process, he meets someone whose resilience and struggles completely change his outlook on life. This is a journey of a man who thought he understood everything about his company, only to realize that the story of his employees is far more complex, emotional, and impactful than he ever could have imagined. Stay tuned because the kindness that emerges from this act will leave you in awe. At first glance, the life of a CEO seems like a dream. Power, influence, and wealth all within reach. Every decision made from a cushy boardroom with panoramic views. But for this particular CEO, the dream had started to feel hollow. He realized that while he had a bird's eye view of his company, he had lost touch with the daily lives of the people who made it all possible, the employees. Their struggles, joys, and the reality of their hard work were hidden from him, locked away behind layers of bureaucracy and corporate hierarchy. Driven by a growing curiosity and a genuine desire to reconnect with the people who made his business thrive, he decided to take a bold step. He would go undercover, step into the shoes of a regular employee, and experience firsthand the challenges they face on a daily basis. This wasn't about surveillance or performance evaluation. It was about understanding the heartbeat of his business, what it truly meant to work there, not just as a CEO, but as one of the many employees. Armed with a disguise, he entered his company under a new name, adopting a completely different persona. Gone was the tailored suit, the confident stride, and the aura of authority. He was now just another worker, a part of the team, blending in with the crowd, doing the same work, and experiencing the same frustrations. He took on menial tasks, worked long hours, and witnessed the everyday grind his employees endured. The once seamless operations were now punctuated by small but significant struggles. The constant pressure to meet deadlines, the stress of balancing personal and professional life, and the unwavering dedication it took to get by. In the midst of all this, he met her, Sarah, a single mother who had been with the company for several years. She was hardworking, dedicated, and seemed to manage it all with a smile. But as he spent more time observing her, he began to see the cracks beneath her flawless exterior. Sarah's life was a juggling act. She was not only trying to keep up with her responsibilities at work, but also navigating the demanding role of being a mother to two young children. Each day was a battle to ensure she provided the best for her kids while maintaining her commitment to her job. Sarah's dedication to her work was evident. She arrived early, stayed late, and often took on extra shifts without complaint. But behind that strong front, there were signs of exhaustion. Her tired eyes, the way she seemed to withdraw into herself during breaks, and the brief moments when she would glance at her phone, clearly worried about her children. It was clear that Sarah was carrying a heavy load, and while she never asked for sympathy, it was hard to ignore the fact that she was pushing herself to the brink. But that wasn't all. Despite all the hard work and sacrifices, she wasn't receiving the recognition or support she truly deserved. The CEO watched from the sidelines, initially unsure how to approach her. His instincts told him to step in, to offer help, but how could he possibly intervene without revealing his true identity? The situation was delicate. Sarah's pride and independence were obvious, and he didn't want to risk embarrassing her or undermining her sense of autonomy. But as the days passed, something shifted. He began to understand just how much Sarah was doing, not just for herself, but for her children, for the company, and for her co-workers. She was a pillar of strength, yet her struggles were largely invisible to those around her, including him. This realization made him reflect on his own position, on how much he had taken for granted in his own life. He had the luxury of control, the luxury of resources, and yet here was someone who was doing everything she could to survive and succeed, all while balancing the demands of motherhood and work. The turning point came one late afternoon when Sarah was visibly struggling. It was nearing the end of the workday, and she was staying late to finish up a critical report. The deadline was looming, and she was anxious about getting everything done in time. But as she was deep in focus, the phone call came. It was from her daycare provider. Her child had fallen ill, and she needed to come pick him up immediately. A wave of panic washed over Sarah's face. She knew that if she left the office now, it would mean staying up late to finish the report, and that would only add to the strain on her already overwhelmed mind and body. But if she didn't leave, her child would be left in the hands of a caregiver, too sick to take care of himself. The CEO, watching her from a distance, saw the internal conflict unfold before his eyes. The weight of her responsibilities seemed to be suffocating her, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it felt like to be in her shoes. He knew he had to act, but what could he do? How could he possibly make this situation better? Without thinking, he walked over to Sarah's desk and, in his undercover persona, offered a simple suggestion. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? You've been working nonstop, and your family needs you. We can manage here. Don't worry about the report. It'll get done. You don't have to do it all. Her initial reaction was one of surprise, even suspicion. She didn't expect someone like him to show such kindness. But as he explained that he understood the pressure she was under, something changed in Sarah's demeanor. She looked at him, eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. And for the first time, someone had acknowledged her struggle, her sacrifices. The CEO watched as she grabbed her things and rushed out of the office, her heart visibly lighter. He felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had made the right call. Little did he know that this small act of kindness would have a ripple effect, not only on Sarah's life, but on the culture of the entire company. It would spark a conversation about work-life balance, employee well-being, and the power of empathy. And it would inspire the CEO to make lasting changes within the organization, started with policies that recognize the emotional and personal lives of employees, especially single parents like Sarah. But what came next after Sarah's emotional departure was truly unexpected. The CEO, still disguised as an employee, began to receive messages from other employees who had witnessed his gesture. It turned out that the kindness he showed Sarah wasn't just a one-time event. It was the beginning of a new way of thinking, a new way of caring. It became clear to him that what he had done for Sarah was just a small part of a much larger movement that was unfolding within his company, and he was more than ready to be a part of it. As the days passed, the CEO's decision to help Sarah rippled throughout the company, opening doors to conversations that had never been had before. And though he had come in with the intention of learning about his employees' challenges, it was clear that in the end, it was Sarah's journey, her courage and resilience, that would ultimately change everything for him. In the dim light of the office, Sarah's face tells a story of exhaustion. Her eyes, though tired, carry a glimmer of resilience, a woman who has learned to navigate the chaos of life with grit and determination. By day, she's a dedicated employee, a force in the workplace, working diligently with a determination that could only come from someone who has no choice but to keep pushing. By night, she's a loving mother, tending to her children, meeting their needs, and trying to juggle it all. There's no time for rest, no luxury of breaks, and certainly no moments for herself. Sarah's day starts early. Before the sun even rises, she's already up, getting her kids ready for school, packing lunches, and making sure everything is in place before she heads out for work. She's already worn thin before even walking through the doors of the office. The constant pressure to be a perfect mother, a reliable employee, and an individual in her own right is overwhelming. Yet, she shows up every single day. Her morning routine is swift, almost robotic. She rushes through the motions, pushing her own fatigue aside for the sake of getting it all done. Her children are her world, but the stress of being the only one who can take care of them is suffocating. As she walks into the office, her shoulders are already heavy with the weight of everything she's balancing. There's a part of her that feels as though she's constantly running just to keep up, but she doesn't have the luxury of slowing down. Throughout the day, her work is a constant reminder of her relentless efforts. She manages to stay focused, responding to emails, taking calls, attending meetings, all while her mind is pulled in a million different directions. when her phone vibrates in her pocket. She can't help but glance at it, fearing it might be an emergency with her children. There's no time to answer every message, but she tries her best to balance everything, never letting on how much she's truly struggling. At lunchtime, Sarah grabs a quick bite in the break room. She doesn't have the luxury of long breaks or catching up with coworkers. Instead, she uses every minute to power through more tasks, sending out reports, making follow-up calls, or replying to messages that require her attention. It's not glamorous. It's not easy. It's just survival. And yet, despite the exhaustion and stress, she doesn't ask for help. She never complains. She just keeps moving forward, day after day, with a strength that is rooted in her love for her children and her determination to make things work. As Sarah continues her daily grind, there's someone else who is watching from a distance. This someone is not just another co-worker, but the CEO himself, though he's disguised as an ordinary employee. Unbeknownst to Sarah, the man who has been observing her struggles and resilience is the very person who owns the company she works for, the one whose decisions affect her life in ways she could never fully understand. But now, in his new role as an undercover employee, the CEO is no longer just a figurehead. He's part of the team, working side by side with the people who keep the business running. He walks the office floor with a sense of curiosity. His decision to go undercover wasn't out of any sort of malice or need to assert control. It was a genuine desire to understand the challenges his employees face, particularly the ones who carry the heaviest burdens. He wants to know the truth behind the culture of his company, the reality of the day-to-day experience of the workers who make everything possible. And as he steps into the shoes of an employee, his initial goal is simple: to understand. But as he begins to work alongside the team, there's one employee who stands out to him. Sarah, the single mom, catches his attention. He watches her as she moves from task to task, taking on additional responsibilities without so much as a complaint. He notices her brief moments of stress, how she pulls out her phone to check on her kids, how her eyes glaze over from sheer exhaustion. He watches as she glances at the clock, her mind clearly elsewhere, and how, despite all the pressure, she never lets the quality of her work slip. There's something in her demeanor that intrigues him. It's not just the dedication she shows at work, but the weight of her personal struggles that seems to be invisible to everyone around her. He can see that Sarah is living two lives, one in the office and one at home, both demanding more than she can give. There's a deep empathy that begins to grow within him as he works alongside her. He sees beyond the surface, sensing the emotional toll she carries with every step she takes. Though he's not yet sure how to help her, the CEO knows that there's something he must do. He's not just observing from a distance. He's beginning to feel the weight of her reality as if it's his own. It's clear that her story is one of sacrifice, perseverance, and deep love, and he wants to know more. As the day stretches on, the CEO continues to watch Sarah closely, observing her from different angles, catching the small moments that most people miss. He sees how she stays late at the office, long after everyone else has gone home. He notices the way her eyes dart nervously to her phone when it rings, her face tightening with concern. It's a pattern that repeats itself daily. Long hours, emotional exhaustion, and a constant juggling act to try and balance everything. One afternoon, as the workday starts to wind down, Sarah gets a call. Her child has fallen ill, and she needs to pick them up from daycare. It's a routine call, one she's had to answer countless times before, but today, the strain is particularly evident. The CEO watches her hesitate, her hand trembling as she holds the phone. She knows she has a mountain of work to finish, yet the pull of her maternal instincts is too strong to ignore. As she gathers her things, the CEO can't help but wonder how many times she's had to make these kinds of decisions: work or family, deadlines or motherhood. The inner conflict is real, and it's one that no one ever sees. He realizes that while she gives so much to the company, she's sacrificing parts of herself. Her health, her well-being, and her peace of mind all take a backseat to the demands of being a working single mom. In those quiet moments, the CEO starts to understand that Sarah's struggles are not just physical. They are emotional, mental, and deeply personal. She is doing the best she can, but it's clear that no one, not even her managers or peers, fully comprehend the emotional labor she's putting in. No one is there to offer a helping hand, to ease the load. The CEO's internal monologue grows louder as he begins to connect the dots. He thinks about his own life, the luxury of having everything in place, the security of knowing his family is taken care of, the ability to delegate tasks without worry. But then he contrasts that with Sarah's life, a constant balancing act, an unending loop of responsibilities that seem to multiply by the hour. He begins to see her as more than just a co-worker. He sees her as a woman who is carrying an immense weight, silently shouldering burdens that no one asks her about. Her exhaustion is palpable, but it's hidden behind a smile that she's perfected over time. It's not the kind of exhaustion that comes from a long workday. It's the kind that comes from fighting a battle that no one sees. In the moments when Sarah's defenses seem to slip, when she lets out a tired sigh or rubs her temples, the CEO begins to truly empathize with her. He sees the toll it's taking on her. The emotional exhaustion, the constant worry, the inability to focus on her own well-being, because there's always something else demanding her attention. The toll on her mental health is not something anyone talks about, but it's there, heavy in the air. Sarah's inner world begins to unfold, and in that quiet moment, the CEO feels a deep sense of responsibility. He's not just here to observe. He's here to learn and understand. And he can't shake the feeling that something must change, that the company has a role to play in easing the burdens of employees like Sarah. He is no longer just a CEO. He is a man who has seen a life he never truly understood. And now, he is ready to do something about it. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon when the CEO first witnessed a moment that would forever change his perception of his company and its employees. He had been working undercover for several weeks now, blending in with the team, trying to understand the day-to-day lives of his workers. But it was during this one fateful day that he would come to a painful realization, one that would bring him face to face with a very human side of business. Sarah had been particularly quiet that morning, more so than usual. She had arrived early, as always, but there was a tension in the air around her. The CEO had noticed it as soon as she walked in, her shoulders slightly slumped, her expression distant. He had seen her in high-stress situations before, but today felt different. He didn't want to pry. Not yet, but something told him to keep an eye on her. The day seemed to drag on, the usual office hum of productivity surrounding them. But Sarah remained a quiet presence in the corner of the room. As the clock ticked past lunchtime, the phone call came. The CEO watched as Sarah's phone buzzed silently on her desk. She picked it up quickly, glancing at the screen. Her face immediately softened as she read the message, but within moments, the calmness faded, replaced by visible concern. The message was from the daycare. Her youngest child was sick, running a high fever, and she needed to come pick him up immediately. There was no hesitation in her movement. She grabbed her things quickly, her eyes scanning the room as if to reassure herself that everything was in order. But as she gathered her belongings, the CEO could see that something deeper was at play. It wasn't just a logistical issue. It was something more, a moment of intense emotional conflict. She hurriedly walked toward the door, her steps quick and anxious. But as she reached the elevator, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her hand went to her wallet, and the CEO could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. She pulled out her credit card, glancing at the balance. It was clear that something wasn't right. For a moment, Sarah stood still in the elevator lobby, the weight of her financial struggles hanging over her like a storm cloud. The CEO observed her, feeling the tension build in his chest. He knew that Sarah was not just dealing with the stress of motherhood and the unexpected situation with her child. She was also facing something far more insidious. Her financial burdens had clearly caught up with her, and he could see the fear in her eyes as she weighed the cost of leaving work early versus the cost of taking care of her child. Sarah had always been the picture of resilience, but in that moment, the cracks in her armor were undeniable. The simple act of leaving work to care for her child, something most people would take for granted, was something Sarah couldn't do without a mental cost. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to balance it all. How could she afford to leave work early and still make ends meet? How could she be there for her child without putting her job at risk? The CEO stood there, a silent observer, struck by the enormity of her struggle. What he had witnessed was far beyond the daily pressures of work. It was a moment that revealed the depth of Sarah's hardship, her constant battle to keep everything together despite overwhelming odds. The realization hit him hard, almost like a punch to the gut. The CEO stood frozen for a moment, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him that he wasn't prepared for. He had seen his employees work hard, seen them go through the motions of their jobs day in and day out, but this was different. This was a real human moment, a moment that laid bare the immense personal struggles that Sarah faced every day just to keep her life from falling apart. His heart ached for her as he watched her stand there, grappling with the pressure of motherhood, finances, and work all at once. He had no idea how long this had been going on, how many times Sarah had silently shouldered these burdens without anyone even noticing, how many times she had struggled in silence, not asking for help, not voicing her fears, because she didn't want to seem weak or unable to handle it all. For the first time since starting his undercover experience, the CEO felt a deep pang of guilt. Here he was, a successful businessman, with access to resources, security, and the luxury of choosing when and where to focus his energy. And then there was Sarah, a single mother, doing everything in her power to make sure her child was cared for while holding her job together with invisible strength. The weight of her world had been so much more than he had ever imagined, and the responsibility of being a leader suddenly felt much heavier. He knew that Sarah's resilience was something to be admired. She wasn't just managing her job. She was managing a family on her own, facing challenges that he could never fully understand. But the CEO also knew that admiration alone wasn't enough. Sarah didn't need a pat on the back or a simple good job. She needed support, genuine, meaningful support that addressed not only her professional struggles, but also the personal ones that were clearly taking a toll on her. As he watched Sarah leave, her face a mixture of determination and exhaustion, the CEO felt a deep sense of responsibility. His role as a leader in the company had always been about driving success, meeting targets, and maintaining a profitable business. But now, he saw that true leadership wasn't just about profit margins. It was about understanding and supporting the people who made those profits possible. And Sarah's challenges, the ones he had witnessed firsthand, were a wake-up call that his company had a long way to go in terms of providing meaningful support for its employees. In that moment, the CEO realized that the work he'd been doing up until now, building a successful company, driving business forward, was incomplete. It was nothing if it didn't also care for the people who made it all happen. Sarah, the single mom, had shown him what true resilience looked like, but she had also shown him the limits of what one person can endure without help. And it was time for that to change. He knew that his decision to help Sarah couldn't just be a fleeting gesture. It had to be part of a larger, lasting change in the company culture. He had seen the depths of her dedication and the real cost of her personal struggles, and it was clear that her perseverance wasn't just admirable. It was deserving of recognition and real, actionable support. The CEO was moved, deeply moved, by what he had just witnessed. It wasn't just a moment of empathy. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both him and the company. Sarah's struggles had opened his eyes to the reality of what it meant to be an employee and to be a single mother trying to balance work and life. He was no longer just an observer. He was now personally invested in her story. And he knew that something had to change, starting with how he treated the people who had worked so hard, so silently, behind the scenes. The moment had arrived, one that would change everything. Sarah sat at her desk, her hands busy with paperwork, her mind still preoccupied with the worries of her day. She had just returned from picking up her child from daycare, still shaken by the phone call, but now tried to focus on the demands of her job. The weight of her responsibilities seemed to press down on her even more with each passing minute. The office around her hummed with activity, but she was lost in her thoughts, barely noticing the quiet footsteps that approached her. Then a voice, one that she hadn't expected to hear, broke through her thoughts. "Sarah." She turned, expecting to see one of her co-workers, but instead, standing before her was a man who had been working beside her for weeks, the man who had been her colleague, a regular employee just like the rest of them. But now, in front of her, he was no longer the same person. The CEO, the very person who had run the company she worked for, was standing there, his disguise dropped, his true identity revealed. There was a brief moment of stunned silence as Sarah processed the shock of this revelation. Her heart raced as she realized that the man who had been observing her, working alongside her, had known all along the struggles she was facing. It was as if the world around her froze for a second, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of the powerful, authoritative figure, with a man who had sat beside her during long shifts, quietly witnessing her daily battle. He smiled gently, understanding the shock she must be feeling. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "But I've been working here undercover for a while now. I wanted to see firsthand what the employees experience, and I've seen a lot of things that have really opened my eyes, especially when it comes to you, Sarah." Sarah's expression softened, a mix of disbelief and confusion flashing across her face. "You've been working here all this time?" she stammered. "Yes," he said softly. "I want to understand what it's really like for the people who keep this company running. People like you. And I've seen your dedication, your strength, and the sacrifices you make every day. It's not lost on me, Sarah." Her eyes welled up with emotion, the weight of his words hitting her like a wave. She had been working so hard for so long, carrying the burden of both her job and her family, and now, someone had finally seen her, really seen her. As Sarah stood there, still processing the shock of the revelation, the CEO took a deep breath and moved closer. The tension in the air seemed to dissipate as he reached into his pocket, pulling out an envelope. He handed it to her, his hand steady but filled with purpose. "I've been thinking a lot about what I've seen here," he said, his voice unwavering. "And I want to do something for you, something that will make a real difference." Sarah hesitated, unsure what to expect. She took the envelope from him, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside, she found a check, a large sum of money, one that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, her mouth slightly open in shock. She had never expected anything like this. She had spent her entire career doing everything she could just to survive, never expecting to receive something this life-changing, this kind. The money wasn't just a financial bonus. It was a solution to so many of her problems. It meant she could finally pay off some of her debts, take a breath, and give her children the things they needed without constantly worrying about how to make ends meet. Tears began to fill Sarah's eyes as she stared at the check, her emotions overflowing. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. This is too much. I never expected anything like this." The CEO smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding. "You deserve more than just recognition. You deserve the chance to breathe, to not worry every day about how you're going to make it all work. This is just a small gesture, but I hope it helps ease some of your burdens." Sarah wiped her eyes, still in disbelief. The overwhelming sense of relief that flooded her was indescribable. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. The weight of her struggles had lifted, if only for a moment. And in that moment, she realized that this wasn't just about the money. It was about being seen, about someone understanding what she had been through and choosing to act. The two of them sat down in a quiet corner of the office, away from the hustle and bustle of the day. The CEO, now no longer just a distant figure of authority, became a person Sarah could talk to, someone who genuinely cared. She began to open up about her journey, her struggles, and the immense pressure she had been under for years. Her voice trembled at times, but it was clear that this was the first real conversation she had had about her life outside of work. "I've been doing this for so long," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she spoke. "Trying to juggle everything, my job, my kids, paying bills. Some days, it feels like I'm running a marathon that I can't finish. I never really get to slow down. And no one really understands, you know? It's hard to explain to people who don't have to worry about where their next paycheck is coming from or how they're going to make sure their kids are okay." The CEO listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He nodded, absorbing everything she was saying. "I can't pretend to know what it's like to walk in your shoes," he said softly. "But I do know that your resilience, your ability to keep going no matter what, is something that not only deserves recognition, but deserves support. You shouldn't have to carry all of this alone." Sarah smiled weakly, wiping away another tear. "I never expected anything like this. I didn't even think anyone was paying attention to me. And now, To hear you say all that, it just means so much. The CEO smiled back, his voice filled with sincerity. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the goals, but it's the people who make everything happen. And you, Sarah, you're one of the strongest people I know. As the conversation continued, both the CEO and Sarah reflected on the impact of this small yet incredibly significant act of kindness. Sarah, still in shock but filled with gratitude, realized that she wasn't invisible, that someone saw her, truly saw her, and cared enough to help in a way that would change her life. For the CEO, this moment marked a turning point. It wasn't just about the money, the gesture, or the promotion. It was about understanding that true leadership wasn't about being in charge or controlling outcomes. It was about empathy, listening, and being there for your people when they needed it most. This moment, this connection, had opened his eyes to the deeper responsibilities he had as a leader. As Sarah left that day, feeling lighter than she had in years, the CEO watched her go, knowing that the impact of his actions would ripple through her life in ways he couldn't fully understand. But one thing was certain: kindness, even in its smallest form, had the power to change lives. And for the audience watching, it was a reminder of the importance of empathy and the transformative power of understanding. Sometimes, the simplest acts of kindness can lead to the most profound changes, not just for one person, but for everyone around them. In the fast-paced world of business, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the deadlines, and the bottom line. CEOs, managers, and employees alike often focus on the task at hand, striving for success and trying to meet the ever-growing demands of their jobs. But in the midst of all this, it's crucial to remember that behind every employee, behind every face in the office, there's a story, a personal journey full of challenges, sacrifices, and triumphs that often go unnoticed. This act of kindness, this small but incredibly powerful gesture, didn't just change Sarah's life. It served as a wake-up call for all of us. It reminded us that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the quietest of people, those who carry their burdens with grace and resilience, never asking for help. And yet, those very people are the ones who make the company, the community, and the world move forward. They are the ones who give their all, day after day, without recognition and often without a second thought about their own well-being. When the CEO chose to step out of his role as a figurehead and see his employees for who they truly were, it wasn't just about offering financial help. It was about acknowledging the weight that people like Sarah carry every single day. It was about realizing that success isn't just measured in profits and productivity, but in how we support and lift each other up. Sarah's story is just one example of the many silent struggles that people endure while showing up every day to work. But her story also serves as a powerful reminder that we all have the capacity to make a difference. The small acts of kindness, the willingness to listen, the simple acknowledgement of someone else's struggles, these are the things that change lives. And in Sarah's case, that act of kindness wasn't just a momentary relief. It was a turning point that gave her the strength to continue moving forward with hope, knowing that she was seen and valued. As we reflect on this story, it's clear that the true essence of leadership and community lies in empathy, understanding, and support. The CEO's decision to recognize Sarah's struggles and offer her assistance wasn't just about generosity. It was about creating a culture of care, one where employees feel heard, appreciated, and empowered. It's a lesson for all of us, whether we're leaders in our workplaces or individuals trying to make a difference in our own circles. The impact of a single act of kindness can ripple far beyond what we can ever imagine. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Are there people around you, in your workplace or your community, who might be struggling silently? Sometimes, the smallest gesture can make a world of difference. Whether it's a kind word, a listening ear, or an unexpected act of help, you have the power to make a positive change. What will you do today to make a difference in someone else's life? Think about it. The power of a single act of kindness could change everything. Be the change you want to see in the world. And remember that you have the ability to brighten someone's day in ways you might not even realize. Let's all make a conscious effort to reach out, listen, and support one another. Because when we care, we all rise together.